Good evening, everyone. This is now our official opening of this class. 2 weeks ago, we had an introductory talk, which sort of laid the groundwork. So if any of you are here or watching for the first time, it's probably a good idea to go back and hear that talk. It just sets up a little bit about what we're actually talking about when we talk about prosperity. Of course, we'll go through that with each class because Swamiji has once again just brilliantly doesn't really say it. I always think a better word for Swamiji is masterful. It's more of a perfect word for him, but masterfully captured each of these secrets in a sentence or less. So we'll see that the first secret, which we'll do tonight, these are secrets of prosperity. And Swamiji says in this book, the secret of prosperity is contentment, not a bank account. And that just sounds very obvious to us. We would say, of course, all of us in this room. But imagine starting a whole book that way. So these little secrets books are about as rich as anything he's written, only they're not 900 pages. So, okay, we'll begin with a prayer, we'll have a chant, and then just a few minutes of meditation, and then we'll go into the class. So let's begin with a prayer. Excuse me. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow before you all. Divine Mother, great masters, guide us on this journey, a lifetime of effort, of deep desire to know thee with no barriers, with no ego consciousness, with our hearts wide open, our minds waiting for your wisdom, and our truest desire to know true contentment. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Amen.
Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone. God alone.
Let's meditate together now for just a couple of minutes. Won't do a long meditation, so let's each do our very best to dive deep, become centered as quickly as we can, and find that place of deep contentment, of God alone within. Om. Peace. Amen. Lakshmi, I've decided to stand. I was driving over here tonight. It's not a very far drive, as you all know. And I realized that I hadn't even thought about chanting and meditating. Of course, I don't chant, and I'm sure you could all hear why, but usually I let Lakshmi or David or somebody know ahead of time, hey, we need a chant. And then I said, this is an emergency. on the way up here. Like, this is really all God has to worry about today. But it felt that way to me. This is an emergency, Master. What is the chant we need for tonight? And just instantly, that chant came to mind. And isn't it perfect for contentment? It's just so perfect. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. It's like, that's really where contentment is. One of my biggest surprises when we went to Israel, I don't remember the name of the church. Maybe Lakshmi does, but it doesn't matter. But there's a whole church where all the way around the church in Israel, this just struck me as being so odd. There's these words of St. Teresa's in, like, I don't know how many different languages. Were you there? Yeah, do you remember? Anyway, I'm not making it up, am I? Maybe. Okay. I could be making it up, but no, that Lord's Prayer is also in all the languages, yeah. I guess that's a nice thing they do in Israel. Now, I'll look it up and I'll tell you all in 2 weeks. I'm fairly certain I'm not making it up. We might not even have gone there the second time. Anyway, this is all irrelevant. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about I don't even know how I got on the topic 2 weeks ago, but we were talking about prosperity, and somehow I wound up on the topic of duality and just the whole cycle of birth and rebirth and what it meant to keep coming back with our karma. It was important. Again, I don't remember the talk now at all, but there were a couple of very meaningful points that were made in the class. And tonight, or today, when I started just looking around for whatever Swamiji might have written about contentment, I came across, and I had forgotten this, but Swami Kriyananda wrote, we've all heard about this many, many years ago now, Material Success Through Yogic Principles. I always felt when I read it, it was a 26 lesson meant to be each lesson distributed every 2 weeks, and like a big study group, and mostly in India. It mostly made it in India. But it was a big deal. It was very expensive, and it took a year of study. And so he condensed some of that at some point, and he wrote what were called the Akash lessons. So he took 5, remember? Yeah, I think we taught it together, actually, over the years. I taught it a few times, but one of those lessons, so 1/5 of all of those lessons, that he condensed those teachings down and sort of pulled out the pearls of it. And one of them is on the topic of contentment, which I had not remembered until I looked around today. Because for those of you who weren't here just a few minutes ago, the secret tonight, so it's the first secret of 30 in his book called Secrets of Prosperity, says the secret of prosperity is contentment, not a bank account. Now, if you remember, I said 2 weeks ago, he wrote these books. He didn't do anything on a lark, but he was just writing ideas down. I think it started with The Secret of Happiness, though that could be wrong, but something like that. He was just writing little pointers, and then he realized he could turn it into a 30-day little book, and then he just started writing those books, and he wound up writing 26 or 27 of them. So every day there's a secret, and prosperity was one of them. But part of what he realized is that, this is very rich, everything in this book. But besides that, people loved them. And they loved them in large part because you didn't get a book like a 900-page commentary on the Bhagavad Gita that terrified you when you looked at it, or the interpretation of Christ, or many of his other books, which were a little daunting when you first look. You get this precious little book with one-liners throughout them. So they're totally digestible little bites, but of pure wisdom. And you remember I said 2 weeks ago, and this is actually important, I'll say it many times as we study the book, and I really felt it today. Each secret, it's a seed thought for the entire spiritual path. It's just, you read this, the secret of prosperity is contentment, not a bank account. But if you expand that or expound on it, you realize that one realizes, and hopefully we all will realize within about a half hour, that everything that we need to know about the spiritual path is contained right in that. Whatever it means for us to be able to truly feel contentment, deep contentment, true contentment, as we'll talk about it a little bit tonight. It's all about the path. If you got to that place of genuinely being able to do everything, and this is not just Swamiji from Akash now, this is from Master, this is from other teachers, this is just 4 pages of notes trying to summarize the depth and the breadth of that little statement. You find contentment and you are wealthy in every meaningful way. You truly find contentment and you have prospered. And what Swamiji realized with the books as they started, and I don't know what level people were really able to absorb the truth in all of it, but they loved reading these little books. So these little books really kicked off crystal clarity, and they really helped bring in a good amount of money for Ananda before people had realized his greatness and before his other books were selling better. And he's very clear. He said, I didn't do this. I've never done anything just to make money. But they were making money, and in the meantime, they were utterly just brilliant, masterful little statements. So in this Akash lesson, he starts out the first line of the entire part, again, 1/5 of his whole book, Material Success Through Yogic Principles, by saying the more that we are living in duality, the less content we are. And then he just states the obvious. The less we're living in duality, the more content we are. And again, these are such simple statements. We would sit here and we would say, oh yeah, we know that. Of course we would know that. But it's actually important to stop and let that come in, that really ego consciousness, which is what duality is about. It's completely about the ego sort of running rampant with our lives. Excuse me for 1 minute. Parenthetically, the first time I ever got a COVID shot was the day that we were holding a staff retreat, an all-day staff retreat. And about 3/4 of the way through the retreat, I looked at the rest of the staff, sort of like, am I making any sense? All looked at me and said, not really. So 3/4 of a day into it, I got my next COVID shot this morning, and this little line is running back here. Are you making any sense? I think so far it has. I haven't gone very far, but I feel this must be what people feel like when they're stoned. No kidding. It's like, woo, you're just... I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be talking about it because I was just telling them Swami Kriyananda never talked about being sick, Do you remember when he used to cough and cough and cough? He never mentioned that he was coughing. It was the most disruptive, difficult, painful thing. He never said a word. He would cough 80% of the time and talk, and I'd say, I don't know how he did it. Anyway, okay. So, and he says very clearly in that book that the ego is the root of all human unhappiness, which we know. Therefore, the ego, of course, is the root of all of our discontentment. I mean, it's just another way of saying it. So the whole topic of duality, which we talked about again, because we're always talking about it again, because it's the essence of everything that keeps us from being happy or contented, but happiness or anything, is really the whole way to find our way to contentment is to work on all of those aspects of the ego that get the best of us. Swamiji was telling, or I think Master told this story actually, a very wonderful story, I don't know if it's true or not, but about a man, an older man, who was talking to a younger man at one point. And the young man was asking him about his life and how he stayed so strong and focused and happy. And the older man holds up this very fragile seashell. Just looks like it could crack in a moment. And the young man says, I don't understand. And the guy tells this story, I'm pretty sure this is true, and Master did tell it, where he was very wealthy. He thought everything that he had depended on his wealth, and then the stock market crashed. And he lost everything, and he became suicidal, just blatantly suicidal, as many people did. So he went to the ocean thinking that he would just walk out into the ocean and let the ocean take him and kill himself. But he said no matter how far out he got, he was always able, somehow he would stand up again. So he wasn't sort of leaving as quickly as he thought he would. Then at one point, the last time he stood up, he looks over and he sees this shiny object in the water, and he realizes it's a seashell. And he picks it up, and it's this very thin, beautiful, like opalescent, but very fragile seashell. And the first thought is, how could this seashell be making it in this tumultuous ocean? And then he said, the thought came to him, it's because this seashell is going with the flow of the ocean. It's not fighting the ocean. When the ocean wants to bring it in, it's coming in. When the ocean wants to take it out, he takes it out. And this is the story that Yogananda tells. And it's actually a very sweet but very meaningful story, just as we're beginning to talk about where does the ego get in the way? How many times in life are we convinced that things should be other than what they are? And, you know, I always have the privilege of knowing most of the people I'm talking to, and myself, of course, so I always know how true this is. But we've all been caught up in it. We actually think that something's off and we're just going to fix it, or we're going to struggle with it and we're going to get it right, as opposed to hearing what's trying to be told to us in various ways. Swamiji talks a lot about when Master said to him that his life would be one of extreme activity and meditation. And if you remember, that upset him so much. He didn't want a life of extreme activity. Swamiji was hoping to have a much more he wanted to be a complete renunciate. He actually was a complete renunciate. But his image of being a renunciate, not having to be out in the world, not having to do so much. And he said it was very hard for him, but of course Master told him. But the other thing that he said about that, which I thought was very meaningful, and again, I'm just talking around points of discontent, which Anybody could have been. Many people couldn't hear what Yogananda told them that they were supposed to do with their lives. Many people have what they call their gurus, but they don't want to listen to what's being told to them. I mean, we know that. We've all been there ourselves, where something's coming and we just don't want it to be so. That's what's so precious about that story that Asha always tells about the little boy who was living up in the first Ananda house away from the village up in San Francisco, one of those huge homes up on, I think it's Broadway. They're massive. I mean, they must be like 20 bedrooms or something, those big homes. And this, I'm sure they was not very well furnished, knowing what I knew about Ananda. So they're cavernous almost. You remember the story. But it's precious. It's just like us, which is what makes it such a great story. And all of a sudden, I think he was 3 or 4 or something like that. At the middle of the night, like 2 or 3 in the morning, he stands up and he screams, "I want it to be morning," at the top of his lungs. And it's funny, but it's not funny because it's what we do, so much of what we do. But Swamiji said that one of the things he decided when he heard that your life will be one of intense activity and deep meditation is that he said, I realized then that my litmus test would be anything that destroyed any inner sense of peace or contentment. He said, I would work as hard as I needed to work, put out as much energy, do everything that I needed to do, but not if it disturbed my sense of inner peace. And, I was thinking about that today, and I thought, well, that is quite a meaningful thing for me, probably for many of us, but certainly for me, to contemplate again right now, because everything we're doing in life is good. We're serving. We're all serving. So what we're doing is good. And yet, if it's disturbing our peace or our contentment, if we get caught up in the thing that we're doing, rather than the God-serving God part of it, then we will not be contented. And it's so wise to just remember what those words of Swamiji's. And he said that many times over the years in many talks. He reminded us. He always called it a litmus test. And it was very important to hear. I thought I would just share another story that Swamiji told. And it's very interesting. It came up in the writing. But for any of you who are coming to KSG, a couple of weeks ago when we were watching a video, Swamiji told this story about this Italian painter, Cellini, who was painting for the Pope. The Pope was, I forget what you call that, but he was hiring him to do some paintings. There's a word. Commissioning him, thank you. Yeah. And but he wasn't paying him. So Cellini would finish the paintings and then not get paid. And finally, one time he told the Pope, who was basically like talking to God, still is, I guess, but in those days particularly, I'm not going to do the next painting until you pay me. And the Pope kind of put his foot down, and he told him, they told his followers to put him in a dungeon, and he kept him there, down below ground. He said there was enough light at the top of the window that he would see 1 hour of daylight. But he said, and the mattress was on the floor and it was damp, and there were constantly rats running over his body and all around the cell. And he was literally being kept alive on bread and water. This is what he said. He said, but in that 1 hour every day, he read the Bible and he prayed. And it's such a beautiful story because it's a true story. And Swamiji said that he then, when he was freed, finally the Pope gave in. Also, he wanted him to paint for him. So he paid him, and Cellini came out and he painted. But he wrote later in his writings, if you really want to know true joy, true peace, true contentment, these were his words, asked to be put in a dungeon below ground on a damp mattress with rats running all around and getting nothing but bread and water, and then read the Bible one hour a day. These are true stories, so they're very compelling. Like, he had nothing. He had a negative nothing. He was literally being tortured. And yet, through that commitment every day to find God, not just in that hour, but then to hold on to that for the other 23 hours, he was able to find joy. These stories just show us how deep peace, deep contentment has nothing to do, nothing. They're extreme stories, but they're real, and they just have nothing to do with what's going on the material plane. And yet, just think about how much of our energy every day, all of us, and we are those people who are in the last 2 minutes of the clock, who have that, what Master called very, very, very good karma to even want to know God. Look how much of our life is spent concerned with, at times even obsessed with, not just things on the material plane, but things on the emotional plane. All of the ways that we get upset or agitated or just drawn off away from our center. So when we remember that Yogananda said, every situation in life is neutral. I mean, imagine that. This is an avatar telling us. He wasn't just finding a pithy little phrase. Every situation in life is neutral. It's just a question of how we see it, of how we tune into it. And Swamiji says something very interesting at some point in all of whatever I read today. He said, think about it. He said, when you're controlled by your ego, which we all are, but if you're attached to your ego still, no matter what people are doing in the world or what's happening in the world around you, the tendency is to believe that it's being done to you or about you or affects you in a certain way. I've said this many times. I can get very paranoid about this. I mean, I can tell tales of myself and not just other people. But I can at times spend months thinking that somebody's misbehaving around me. Like they don't like me or I'm irritating them, whatever it is. And I'll keep thinking, look, every time I'm around them, this is how they behave. And it's taken me a long time in some of those instances to realize, and I use that word consciously, that's who they are. It had nothing to do with me. I just happened to move in front of them, either that day or for those weeks or those months. And I actually mean I feel this is a very important point that I'm making, because if we use the word paranoia, it sounds too strong, because none of us in this room are actually paranoid. But that feeling that things are being done to us or because of us or around us is very often nothing more than our egoic attachment. And so Swamiji says very simply, it's not so simple, let go of the ego. Because when you let go of your ego, you realize everybody's just out in the world doing their thing. Situations happen. We're not really at the absolute, we're not at the center of everything, right? We're not. Not this egoic self isn't. The universe itself is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. That's a very different concept. That's wherever you are in the middle of all of what's ever been manifested in the world. And you're at the center of all of the consciousness in the world. Very different than the egoic self feeling. This is how little 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds develop an ego, which they need to do. Or that super ego that says, me, me, me. It's all about me. And I'm sure it looks even more that way when you're 1 and you're 2. But the problem for many of us is that we don't let go of it. For almost all of us, so that we're certain that what's going on in the world has only to do with us. I mean, if you think about it and you realize what it means, that simple statement, and I don't know exactly how Swamiji said it, but basically, the more we can let go of our ego, the less we can live in a place of duality, the more contentment we'll find. And the corollary of that is we cannot be contented. We will not be contented until we can do that. The further along this continuum of evolving spiritually away from ego and towards the divine, and I don't know why I'm doing it there, because I could say towards the divine. If we think of it as that which exists as our very core, we can find contentment. We will not find contentment if we don't do that. And then the good news is that once we find it, nothing in the world can take it away from us. That's why that wonderful, I don't think it's the opening line, but it's very near the beginning of How to Be Happy All the Time. That statement that Master made, if you want to be happy, nothing and no one can make you unhappy. I mean, just meditate on that for a while. We read it, we say it, it sounds cute. If you want to be happy, nothing and no one can make you unhappy. But then he goes on to say, and if you want to be unhappy, nothing and no one can make you happy. I have to see what time it is. Forgive me. Oh, my Lord. I'm always surprised at how time goes. Okay. I just want to mention a few other things. I'll talk for just a little bit longer, and then because we have till 8:30, because I would love to be able to turn this into a discussion. Then this is some coming together of things that Swamiji has said, that Master said, what it says in the Gita. I mean, just from different places, but talking about many of the aspects of life that we need to look at differently if we're going to think about contentment and what it means. Oh, I also thought it was interesting, and this I'll come back to those qualities. I had forgotten that contentment was one of the niyamas until I was reading it. Of course it is, I remembered it, but I had forgotten it. I mean, when Patanjali says, here are states, conditions, resolutions that every soul will need to go through. Doesn't matter what religion you are, doesn't matter what sex you are, doesn't matter if you're an Arab or you're an Israeli or who you are. You will need to resolve all of this if you want to find God. It's just sort of interesting, all this fighting that's going on about God, isn't it? But nobody who's fighting like that is realizing that it doesn't matter which side of that boundary they live on. It's true for every one of them. So Patanjali says you have to find contentment. I mean, he talks about it then, but I love that he says that, let me just find that. Oh yeah, remember how with the niyamas, Patanjali says, if you perfect this practice, this is what can happen to you. So if you perfect the practice of contentment, it brings the consciousness of divine bliss in everything one does. Again, this is Patanjali saying this. We have to perfect it. Once we perfect it, we're in a state of divine bliss. That's why I wasn't hooked bringing them together, but that's why just before I was saying, once you are contented, once you've found it, you won't lose it. I mean, you can trip. We all trip on the path. But once it's real, once it's at this state of divine bliss, once it's complete, nothing can take it away from you. I find that very reassuring. I don't know how much anybody else does, but it makes me feel that it's within our grasp. That's what it makes me feel. When I was just putting this all together today, I kept thinking, I can do that. Yeah, we can do that. There's many things here that we can do. We don't maybe bring enough effort to it all the time. We don't remind ourselves. We give ourselves room to sort of drift off and think, they're treating me badly, or I'm right and they're wrong, and why don't they see that? Or if just this little situation in my life was changed, I'd be happier. But, I've often told people in many, many moments of counseling, if you don't get it just right, wherever you are, it can be with a job, it can be with a partner, a parent, a child, if you don't feel that you have done your absolute best and you feel perfectly clear about that, you'll just go out and recreate it. We all do. We'll just keep recreating the same situation until we get it right. Doesn't mean that we have to stay in this situation. It's that we need to be able to be honest and say, no, I am truly at peace. I feel deeply contented here. I'm clear. I have brought my very best. Those moments where you can feel the ego's out of the way. And, most of us trip through lifetimes, and some of us trip through a few marriages and even one lifetime. So it's just the nature of the human condition. But the truth is, we will keep recreating the situation until we get it right, because that is the soul's longing for God. And it's just going to keep longing, and we're going to keep getting in its way until we ourselves get it right. And that is, every situation in life is neutral. It's how we see it. So it doesn't mean that the job is perfect for you. No. But it means if you're being reactive with the job, if you're getting agitated every day when you go to work, if you're blaming your boss or your coworker, you have a lot to learn. And you'll just find the opportunity to learn it again. And, as I often say, here we are 10 million lifetimes later. We're going to get it soon, but we've still already put in 10 million lifetimes trying to learn these lessons. Looks very obvious when we're just saying the words. Every situation's neutral, get your ego out of the way, whatever. This all sounds very simple. And I think it is simple, but it's really not easy. So we just keep coming back and back and back until we can get it right. Then Swamiji goes on to talk about, in the Akash lessons, several qualities that he just throws them out there, so they're not necessarily related. They're little paragraphs, little points along the way. But he says, nervousness, this is interesting to me, they're all interesting. Nervousness destroys contentment. Well, that makes sense, of course. You cannot be feeling content if you're also feeling nervous. But he says, think more in terms of giving to others than of receiving from them, because an outward flow of energy contributes greatly to our inner satisfaction. So he's saying, in essence, do exactly the opposite that we feel inclined to do. When we're nervous, most of us, we just close in more and more on ourselves. It's not when we think to give a lot. But Swamiji's saying, stop. When you're feeling anxious, find ways to give. You remember that story that I've told many times now I won't tell the whole story, but about that patient that I had when I was working up at the county. Everything went wrong for this man for years. He had insulin-requiring diabetes. He had what was called labile diabetes, couldn't get it under control, but he couldn't get any insurance to pay for his insulin, so he was always even more out of control. And because his diabetes was so out of control, he lost his job, he lost his home, he lost everything. I worked with him for about 2 or 3 years. He was just getting more and more and more angry, really angry. And I understood. I mean, the system was really failing him. Like this, what are those plays called? Something, Theater of the Absurd. That's what it felt like, really, but except it was his life. And one day I walked into the room and I said to him, there's only one way you're ever going to get out of this. And he said, what? And I said, you need to start volunteering and serving a few days a week. And that man got so angry with me and started screaming at me. Several nurses came running in to make sure I was okay. He was enraged, like the nerve of me to suggest that. But somehow I knew, I mean, now it seems obvious, but it wasn't obvious in those days for me. Just felt like you have to get outside of yourself because it's pretty horrible inside of yourself. I mean, the situation is horrible and you're reacting horribly. But I mean, he just felt so beaten up. And I could see that. I could just see that. But I knew it was just a dead-end road for him. This took about 3 or 4 visits, which at the county probably took close to a year. But eventually, he came in one day and said to me that he had started serving about 3 or 4 times a week. I wasn't at the Salvation Army, but it was something like that, serving meals or whatever he was doing. He said, for the first time in years, I actually feel better. Nothing had changed, nothing outside of him, just within him. So these are not easy behaviors to develop. It's not easy to control our thoughts. Honestly, this is why spending time with other spiritually uplifting souls matters so much. This is why it matters so much to listen to Swami Kriyananda's music. This is why it matters so much to be studying some great teacher's teachings, because we cannot do it. We can't. He had every reason in the world to feel sorry for himself and to be angry. Every reason. I know how angry I was getting 2 weeks ago. My Lord, I'm a physician, I'm smart, I'm privileged. I could not get the medical system to take care of Barry. I couldn't do it. I'm calling his PCP, I'm calling the urologist. The urologist calls the PCP and says, would you tell her to quit bothering us? I mean, that's what was happening. Yeah, you take care of my husband and I'll quit bothering you. It's unbelievable. And by the way, nobody ever called me to apologize that I was right. I mean, it's maddening. It is. And I just kept saying to myself, Shanti, breathe, put it down. Don't get mad at Barry about it. Don't get mad at anybody. But it's very frustrating. And that's in the best of circumstances. Imagine. But how are we going to remember what we need to do when we're nervous? How are we going to remember? Swamiji says, humility is self-forgetfulness. So to keep being humble, practicing humility. We're not like that. Most of the time, there's a little bit of arrogance. In each of us, we are not the world's most arrogant people, but arrogant in the sense of, look at what I can do, look at what I accomplished. It happens because we're human. But again, he says that. He goes on to say, he says, try to conquer your likes and dislikes. Well, I mean, there you have the whole of life. That is not easy. But he's saying, just do that and you'll find contentment. But it's not, I don't want to, I mean, I did giggle when I led that today because, yeah, if I could do that, I would not be in most of the situations I'm in. But reading it again, hearing it again, really, what does it mean to not allow ourselves to just run rampant with those things we like and those things we don't like? Because all of that just defines us more and more and more as me, as separate from you, different from everybody. It's isolating. It's not, it's the nature of duality, not unity. It's exactly the opposite of being contented. So all of these things that we learn, I mean, he goes on, he says much more, but there's just a couple of them that I wanted to point out because of other things. Not, if you'll have to read the Akash lesson to go through all of that. But Swamiji says at some point, let me see if I can just find this quote of his. No, I can't find it, so I'm just going to say it. Swamiji says, contentment is an attitude that has to be deliberately practiced. That's the word he uses, deliberately practiced. So, I mean, that's the lesson for this secret, to really go after it. How am I going to practice with these things? And I'm inclined to want to make my notes available because I feel like I can't say it all. But I picked out the best of what these teachers and others, I mean, I just glanced down and I was just reading this quote from the Gita, where Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata calls contentment the supreme virtue. And I was thinking today, I've heard that before. Of course I've heard that before. What does that mean, though? Why is contentment the supreme virtue? But when you listen to all of the rest of it and you realize that the only way to be content is to move beyond your ego, of course it would be called the supreme virtue, because it is only in that egoless state, only, that we can experience it. And when Swamiji says it's an attitude to be deliberately practiced, to me, I would think that's the takeaway for tonight, is that there's many points, and we can look them up, or again, there must be some way to make these notes just available online or something. Watch me shaking her head, yes. Because they're just picking out the best of what Master and Swamiji, but the Gita, Patanjali, it's just not one teacher, it's truth. So they'll all say the same things about contentment. But how can we remind ourselves? And that's why I was saying satsang is certainly the most important thing. Listening to Swamiji's music. Karen Anaya Gamau just had such a great idea for these groups that we do, these Kriya Satsang, these study groups that we do. We're always studying a book. And she just said, why don't we just start going through the songbook? All of Swamiji's music, 450 pieces of music. Because, you've all heard me say, you could look at any one of those songs. You could look at a couple of lines from any one of those songs, and the whole of the spiritual path is there. It was a great inspiration that she had. But I don't even know how I got back onto his music, but whatever they're saying, they're speaking truth. And this line that we say every week, truth is one and eternal, it actually really is. So all of these great saints are saying the same thing. Jyotish says in his book on marriage, Jyotish wrote, I think the 30-Day Essentials, is that what it's called? Yeah. So he did the same thing, actually, with what Swamiji did. Only his book is on marriage. So he says on there, day 15, in case you want to know, is about contentment. And he says contentment has been called the highest virtue. It comes from accepting things as they are, rather than pushing them away because life isn't giving you exactly what you want. Now, think about that in the context of a marriage. That's extraordinary. I mean, if we could all think about that throughout our marriages or our other relationships, we would probably have a lot fewer arguments. Let me just put it that way. I was trying to think of how to say that well. I mean, because again, I'm aware the relationship might still not live through whatever. They're not all meant to. But it would be much more peaceful as we went. So he's saying this. He says it's a disease of the heart, this is Jyotish, that all the world's wealth cannot cure any more than an ocean of salt water can slake a raging thirst. And he gives this beautiful affirmation, Jyotish. He made this up. This is what he says. He says it every day, at least when he was writing this book. I am grateful for my life exactly as it is. I am thankful for this day. I welcome every hour. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, it just says, it's so simple, but it says so much. I'm grateful for my life exactly as it is. That is so profound. It's just so remarkably profound. It might not sound that way, but if we could all live that way, we would all be where we think we want to go much more quickly. We would all feel one with God much more quickly. Okay, I'm going to stop. Let me just stop there. There's a lot more notes here, but let me move this aside and see who has any comments or questions, thoughts. Gito. Hold on for 1 minute. I can repeat the question while Lakshmi's getting it anyway.
So likes and dislikes is a clear way to understand the ego has hold of me. Is that more or less true? And we have many techniques to take people deeper and deeper into meditation, but I haven't heard a technique here. I haven't heard a technique that takes us to encounter our likes and our dislikes, and follow them step by step into a way to neutralize the ego.
I think following them step by step would take us further into our ego. There's a line here, and I'm not trying to just nitpick words with you, but, let me find a way to say this. You all know that I'm married to a psychotherapist, and he's brilliant, and he's helped many, many, many people, and I have great respect for that profession. I do. But there's a way in which it will never be the ultimate solution. Because I feel, and this can be a little bit of a discussion if you think I'm either not getting it or if you disagree, but I think psychotherapy keeps taking us further and further and further into our likes and dislikes. I do feel, having been I went through about 4 great years of psychotherapy myself in my 20s, and I'm convinced it helped me get free to the degree that I'm free. I'm not saying I'm perfectly free, but wherever I am right now, I credit those years of therapy with a really brilliant therapist. I think it can be very helpful. But I think what we're doing here is that we are looking for the spiritual solution to everything, not the psychological solution. And they're very different. So what I think is that if we look at likes and dislikes as a hold that the ego has on us, I like this, I don't like that, I think this is good, I don't think that's good, this is clearly bad, why don't they see it? I mean, it's just remarkable the trips that all of us, we know this has been studied scientifically. How many thoughts do we have in the span of a day? But how many of those are negative thoughts or judgmental thoughts? The vast majority of them. It's been studied. I'm sure you probably know that. But if we get ourselves up, that's why I think this sentence, I know what I want to say, but let me just find the best way to say it to you. This line that I said, that contentment is an attitude to be deliberately cultivated. I love those words of Swamiji's because it's not about figuring it out. It's about lifting ourselves into the proper place. Proper means right attitude. And, everything becomes a talk, and I have to find a way to just respond to what you said. But right attitude is huge on the path. It's huge. Master said you can't even step onto the spiritual path without right attitude. And that's part of what we're talking about right now. We're saying, are we going to be over here figuring it out, trying to look for our way out, walking down this road, coming to a dead end, going down this road, being hurt again? I've been there. I'm older than anybody in this room. Well, I'm not. I have to look at Ellen, but she and I are close. And I've just tried all these ways a lot. I just still am. Let me just be honest. But the only thing that I find really works is when I say to myself, stop it. Stop it. You cannot have another thought that way. You can't figure out, why do I like this? How is this bothering me? How would it be better to do? No, it is simply a question. I don't know if you think this is answering your question or not. I'm getting the feeling not, because I'll stop because I think you want to say something else to me.
Well, may I share a little technique that I use? When I recognize something I don't like in another person, I try to identify the components of behavior that actually are irritating. And then I look in myself to see where I have those components of behavior that I'm actually projecting on them and not liking.
Yeah.
And then I look for the quality and try to name the quality. Let's name a quality. How about one we all don't like? Bitchy. I don't like it when somebody's bitchy with me. And then I find out that, oh my, I have some bitchiness in me. Yeah. And so I name that quality, and then I try to find it's the gift. Where does bitchy keep me safe? Where does it allow me to insist on my rights? So this is a little technique that I've used, and I think that I have amazed myself at the number of dislikes that I find in other people. Almost every day I find dislikes, and using this little technique can help me dissolve them.
Well, first let me say, and I genuinely mean this, if it's working for you, that's great. And I honestly mean that. For me, it would feel like I was taking a very roundabout, circuitous route and focusing on the problem longer than I would want to. But that is not a judgmental statement, so I want to say that to you. But I'm going to stick to what I'm saying, which is that there is the psychology of things, and that is meaningful. We have to clear those things out. I have met so many people in my life who have felt that they could step onto the spiritual path and brush all of the psychology under the proverbial rug. And I want to tell you that, which probably everybody in this room knows, it doesn't work. So we have to do, I feel, some of those things. But I do feel like that's the psychology of it. That's how I'm hearing it. And I am really trying to speak to going right to the spirit of it, because that's what Swamiji isn't talking about figuring out. Master does say, he says loud and clear, whatever you see in somebody else that you don't like, it's in you. But he doesn't say, so spend time, figure out where it is in you, figure out how it manifests, name it, categorize it. He doesn't say that. I'm not saying, I know this is hard. I know this is hard right now, but I have to say it because it's just what the class is. It just, as I said, I just stick to that statement. It feels like a little bit of a roundabout way that will get, if it gets you there, it's perfect. But for me, I would rather go right to the, so again, we all just are where we are. And I guess because I'm teaching this class, I'm allowed to do this. I don't want to make light of it. It's not just because I'm teaching the class. It's because I genuinely feel that part and parcel of what contentment means is trying very hard to not spend too much time there. I do. I think that gets painful. But again, if you feel like it's brought you a lot further on the path, and I'll bet you're not the only one, so then we each have to do what we have to do. I mean, we should do what we need to do, is what I mean. Shankari.
Being on this path and being, deep in meditation quite frequently, we reach that point of what I would also call content. When we are content, how do we move? How do we act? I mean, we're content, but yet we're still in the world moving around and acting and doing things.
Yeah.
So when we're content, what makes us move?
First of all, we should all have that problem. That would be a very good problem to have. But pure contentment, because again, Patanjali said, you cannot perfect any one of the qualities in his eightfold path until you've perfected all of them. So pure contentment means samadhi, which is the eighth fold. So we would, if we're perfectly content, honestly, we would be free. So again, it would be a good problem to have, but then it's not a problem. It's interesting, there's something that I read today that let me just think if I can pull it up from what you just said. I wrote it down because it was important. I'm sorry. There's something I would like to say that felt very meaningful, but I can't find it right now. It's somebody, this is along the lines, but it's not right. The answer to what you're asking, I believe, is what I just said. we're always moving towards contentment. And we do that just by being here tonight, by keeping company, by being around each other, by, again, all of the things that we always talk about. We are doing those things because we're moving towards that state of contentment. But pure contentment is still probably in the future for most of us. Having said that, somebody asked Master, what is meant by being contented as opposed to, or but not satisfied? So, which is a little bit about, like you're saying, what's keeping us moving? Are we completely satisfied? Do they mean the same? And Master's comment, response to it, he said, contentment has in it an element of cheerful renunciation. It also includes a keen realization of the possession of things that are really worthwhile. So he said, we attain contentment, we're not born with it. So he's saying, the reason I drew this up for me is because it's a path that we're on. So we're all still moving towards it because we're not there. We're getting there. You know, that's why Davy's statement that anybody who's here is in the last 2 minutes of the clock. That's a pretty powerful statement. I mean, she said, Master said that. In 24 hours, so 60 times 24, somebody else can do the math, but we're in the last 2 minutes just to be here. So we're highly evolved souls, actually, but we're not self-realized. So we still have that impetus. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to say briefly, you know, Swami has an affirmation in the affirmations for self-healing, and I think it is for contentment. It's, through life's mightiest storms, I am contented, for I hold in my heart God's peace. Yeah. And I was thinking that, therefore, contentment must be a quality of the heart. And it really makes sense, you know, when I started thinking about it, which was actually just about 5 minutes ago, but just that it's that, you know, it's this relaxation of the heart.
Yep.
And then that wonderful quote you just read of Master's, of accepting. It's just acceptance of whatever is in the moment, acceptance of whatever comes our way, just an ease with it, and this, I think at the heart of what he was saying is just this, that we're anchored to deeper qualities. We're anchored to deeper satisfaction so that no matter what comes, we're able to rest in that contentment in our heart. And it's just so, even the thought of it is so satisfying.
Isn't it so, it's calming, isn't it? Yeah, I like what you're saying and how you're saying it. It was one of the many things I didn't say tonight, but you're just tuning into it, that contentment is an experience in and of the heart. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because we all know that if we're emotional, we're not content. And if we're emotional, we're not devotional. When we're devotional, we're with God. We're really looking right up into the light of God. And the heart is such an important stop on the journey to God. I mean, it's everything, yeah. So, I mean, it just makes perfect sense what you're saying, but I do love that you brought us there, yeah.
You know, as I heard that question, a thought came to me that if you were contented, you would move even faster, easier, more efficient, more relaxed, and you would achieve far more than what you're doing today. Because if you look at the life of all the masters, you know, how much they've done in one lifetime is just unbelievable. So if you were contented, I think you would just be just easily achieving more stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. The image that just came to mind when you were saying that is the difference between a frictionless state versus friction, because friction slows us down. And when we're discontented, I don't know why it popped into my mind, but I think it's what you're trying to say. The closer towards contentment we are, the less friction we're feeling in the world in all the ways that we're all talking about the world. So, yeah. Anybody else? Letty?
I have a little story to share. A few months ago, for maybe the first time ever, I was concerned about my money that I had, or lack thereof, rather. And that was the first time I was ever not contented with money. And worried about where it would come from. I've never worried about money. And immediately I had the thought, where's my faith in God? And I feel like that's possibly a key component to contentment, is knowing that everything's taken care of by God. And as soon as I had that feeling, the stress, the anxiety, the worry, every emotion of money went away. And we actually just came into some money from our tax refunds that we did after that, or our taxes, and it's just, I feel like just what's being shared tonight. It's of the heart, and it's something that causes less friction in everything.
Well, because your immediate thought was really of faith. And that just, it dissolves everything else when it's genuine like that. So good for you, really, that you could go there. Because money, I mean, that's why the first thing is contentment, not a bank account. Because the vast majority of people in the world feel that they equate prosperity with money, and they actually think they'd be happier if they had more money. It's just really true. And so it's great that even with something that gets such a hold on so many people, that you could immediately say, wait a minute, where's my faith? Good. Okay, wonderful. See you all in 2 weeks. I think we talk about happiness in 2 weeks. I haven't read this book. I don't know what comes next. Yeah, happiness. There you go. All we have to do is be happy and we'll be prosperous.